I had actually finally gotten to a place where I was like, okay, I have a consulting business part-time. I'm teaching as an adjunct professor for 2 universities. And like, I really think I'm like starting to heal from some of this just disappointment and frustration that has happened in my career. And I was walking and listening to the scriptures on the Dwell app and was listening to the book of Nehemiah. And I was like, man, I got to this chapter 3 part where they're rebuilding the wall. Interesting that nobody in the faith and work movement is talking about this story when we talk about faith and work. And there's so much there. And I was like, why haven't I heard about this? It's just like this inner frustration of like, why are we not talking about this story more? And then I remember I was asking the Lord at one point. I was at the beach on vacation. I was like, Lord, I think I'm ready to write a book. And I really sensed this invitation to bring these two pieces together, this hurt that I had experienced throughout my work life, and that a lot of my friends and family members have experienced. And then this story of God's people rebuilding the wall in Jerusalem and seeing what came of it. And I was just like, okay, interesting. We're going to try to do this. And then the Lord really knitted those two things together in a way that I think was really beautiful.
Well, hi there to our viewers. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Faith Roundtable. This is Josh Burtram. I'm your host here. I'm also the co-host of the Faithful Politics podcast, which happens on this same channel. So make sure you check that out, guys. Like, subscribe, do all the cool things that hack the algorithm for YouTube so that we can continue to get this great content out to you. And I'm excited today to be able to have on the program Dr. Meryl Herr. She had her PhD from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and she is the owner of the Good Works Group LLC, a consulting firm specializing in educational program planning and evaluation. She previously served as the Director of Research and Resources at Fuller Seminary's Max DePree Center for Leadership, where she conducted research and created resources to help Christian marketplace leaders integrate their faith with their work. Meryl lives with her family near Athens, Georgia, and we are really excited to have her on the program today to talk about her latest book, When Work Hurts, Building Resilience When You're Beat Up or Burnt Out. Meryl, thanks so much for being on the program today.
Thanks so much for having me, Josh. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I gave a little bit of your bio there for our viewers and our listeners to see that, but I would love to kind of fill in some of the, gaps there. Kind of tell us a little bit more about who is Meryl Herr and how did you come about starting organizations that help educational reform and writing books about burnout and work hurt?
Whew, this might take the whole 60 minutes. It's a long story. But I will say, first and foremost, I'm a mom of 2 boys and a wife to a wonderful husband.
I will pray for you. I have 1 son, and he is a handful.
Yeah, I love my boys. I'm a soccer mom. And so the soccer season as we're recording is just ramping up. So I will be spending a tremendous amount of time in my car shuffling people to their various soccer games and tournaments over the next few months. But it's a deep joy to do that.
So I got to ask you, Meryl, are you going to have a cowbell? My mom used to have a cowbell and she would ring it and scream, "Go Burtram, go Burtram." Do you do anything? Do you try to embarrass your children?
I'm probably not the cowbell mom, but I definitely had a really fun moment this past weekend. I was watching my older son who is on a U13 team. Most of the players on that team are 12 and 13. They were playing in a tournament, playing a really tough team. And our seats were just overlooking the the pitch, and I was able just to yell down. He was just really battling for a ball, for the ball, and going up against some kids that were way bigger. And I was just in there like, yeah, go number 10, let's do it. And then at the end, I even threw some of the, common teen speak lingo at him, which he finds really cringy, but he loved. He said it made him smile.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Did you say that was, what was it, Riz or something? You
No,
threw some stuff in there?
I said, like cooking, you're cooking or something like
You were
that.
cooking
So,
out
yeah.
there. There you go. That's great. That's great. So how did you start? Yeah, this book. Kind of tell us, how did you get about writing this book on work hurts?
Yeah, so this book, Josh, honestly came about as a result of having to build resilience after facing a lot of hurt in my own career. So I, going into college, thought the world was my oyster in many ways, thought the sky was the limit in terms of career possibilities and earning potential and climbing the corporate ladder. I went to a really good school that had really high expectations for its graduates. And after I graduated, I went to seminary because I really felt like that was the next good step in terms of really understanding the scriptures more. I really sensed at that point still that I wanted to do something around education and maybe something around ministry, but I didn't have like this super clear sense. Like a lot of my seminary friends had this like really clear sense that God had called them to be a pastor. Yes. And they were like, Meryl, what has God called you to do? And I was like, get equipped for whatever God calls me to do after this. So
you're like, I guess something good.
All the clarity I had, right? And so did that, went straight into a pastoral residency with my husband at a church called Christ Community Church. It's in Kansas City. And this pastoral residency was crucial for a couple of reasons. One, it was just this tremendous time of professional formation for ministry. But two, it's where I really got introduced to this whole idea that our faith should connect with our work. The senior pastor there is Dr. Tom Nelson. He's written a lot about faith and work. And so being in the church there for a while, I started thinking, oh, this is interesting. Like my faith and what I sense God inviting me to do should impact how I think about my career and what I do in the workplace. And then everything kind of fell apart because right at the end of that was the Great Recession. And
yes,
I went from having a full-time job to being unemployed and underemployed for a season that was really difficult. I was doing the job searching thing. I was working retail. I was freelancing, doing anything to try to make a buck and find a place to serve my gifts. And there was just a ton of heartache there. And that heartache just continued throughout my career. I did go up. Part of that journey did lead me to get a doctorate focusing in educational studies. And I also did a lot of work around research there. I love doing research and came out of that with a skill set that I wanted to, use and share with the world. I was really hoping initially that I might get a job as a professor, but I was a young mom. I was mostly at home with my kids, working part-time. My husband was a pastor. And so it was just hard to find, like, how do you find a job that fits your gifts and skills when you're not moving anywhere because your spouse is anchored there. You also, feel this pull to caring for your kids. So just a lot of questions and really wrestling with God, like as a part of my story, applying for more jobs, not getting them. And I finally got to a place, this is maybe, I don't know, a couple years before the pandemic. We were living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My boys were young. I had actually finally gotten to a place where I was like, okay, I have a consulting business part-time. I'm teaching as an adjunct professor for 2 universities. And like, I really think I'm like starting to heal from some of this just disappointment and frustration that has happened in my career. And I was walking and listening to the scriptures on the Dwell app and was listening to the book of Nehemiah. And I was like, man, I got to this chapter 3 part where they're rebuilding the wall. Interesting that nobody in the faith and work movement is talking about this story when we talk about faith and work. And there's so much there. And I was like, why haven't I heard about this? It's just like this inner frustration of like, why are we not talking about this story more? And then I remember I was asking the Lord at one point. I was at the beach on vacation. I was like, Lord, I think I'm ready to write a book. And I really sensed this invitation to bring these 2 pieces together, this hurt that I had experienced throughout my work life and then a lot of my friends and family members have experienced. And then this story of God's people rebuilding the wall in Jerusalem and seeing what came of it. And I was just like, okay, interesting. We're going to try to do this. And then the Lord really knitted those two things together in a way that I think was really beautiful.
Wow, that's so cool to hear. So, when I hear work hurt, I've been through work hurt, I think, right? And I've been offended before. I've been really hurt. I've had to process through things. I've had myself denied raises or denied requests or denied, all those things you kind of try to do. And then you're trying to kind of climb up and get as successful, quote unquote, as you can be. And then you hit a boundary and then you get, hurt. But many times those people weren't trying to hurt me. They didn't have there wasn't an intentionality behind it. It was more like, oh, my expectations were here. Reality was here. And that gap created pain. So how do you define work hurt, if you could do that from us? And what kind of distinguishes it from just kind of normal stress, from the job or high expectations from an actual deep wound caused by your workplace environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the book, I talk about 3 different categories of work hurt. And so one of them is really close to what you have just described, and that's disappointment. And that's when our expectations don't match reality. So you're just like you said, you're hoping for the raise and you don't get it. Or even just little things like the printer being out of ink. Like a couple of weeks ago, my printer was not hooking up with
That's the worst kind of work hurt.
And I was working downstairs and had to run upstairs a bazillion times, and my printer trips my circuit in my office. So then going to flip the circuit breaker, I was like, what's going on? Right? That's disappointment. Those frustrations, it's not going the way we want it to. And those frustrations and disappointments, there's a range of them, right? There are some that are the printer thing, we can just move on about our day, right? But not getting a raise that you've been hoping for, that can be pretty profound, right? So that can actually cause some deep wounds, especially if you feel like you've earned it or you've been working for a company, an organization for a long time and haven't even gotten a standard of living increase in your pay. That can be really disappointing.
Yeah.
The next category I talk about is disillusionment. And that is when you have certain assumptions about how work should go or how the people in your work environment should comport themselves. And something happens that shatters your assumptions and told you, oh, I had this all wrong. And so that could be from thinking you get into a workplace and your boss says something really harsh to you. And you have this moment where you're a little discombobulated because you thought, oh, I assume my boss was a caring, compassionate individual, and they just said something really horrible. So then you have to start to do that work of figuring out, is this a pattern or, are they having a bad day? But it shatters what you thought work was supposed to be about. And then there's the devastation. And the devastation is the stuff that is really, really wounding. It's the unexpected layoff. And the time we're recording right now, that devastation is at peak level, especially for a lot of federal employees. I think people that are working for nonprofit organizations, working with refugees, they are losing their jobs or they're under the fear of losing their jobs left and right. And so that is really, really hard to come back from stuff like that, getting fired. I think for individuals, it's going to be different. The depth of the wound based on the particular work hurt, there's going to be some individual differences in how we respond to different things. So something can be, somebody might be able to brush it off, but it's deeply traumatic to another individual.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that there be these categories that, of course, have a spectrum. Like you think about your own body, where you get hurt from a paper cut. That may be like the printer, frustrating, annoying, whatever, but it's not like getting something, a life-threatening disease or something that comes up that really shatters kind of your expectations of life and the way that you've been living your life. And it creates these profound shifts and uncertainties. And it takes me to this idea of resilience, which is something that you talk about in your book. And what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about resilience in the workplace, even in the sense like resilience is great, but at what point is resilience maybe even hurtful because you need to, I don't know, make a shift or something?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I wish I had the reference for this, but I was actually on Instagram yesterday and saw a great reel. I think it's a Duke professor who had a guest lecturer in his class talking about resilience. And one of the things that she said is like, some people think resilience is going to be easy, but resilience is actually quite messy, right? And when it comes
Yes.
to work hurt, right, we live in an imperfect world. And so just because we've experienced one hard thing at work in our life, it could even be like one really hard, like devastating event at work. It doesn't mean we get like a, free pass stamp that we don't have any more work hurt, right? And so that resilience is that need to like continue to engage in helpful practices and good skills, good coping skills to try to bounce back from that. And hopefully over time you like have the resilience, the resources within you and in your community to help you respond more quickly and bounce back more quickly to certain things. But yeah, you are right. There are moments when resilience can cause tremendous harm. I think that's especially when somebody is in what we might call a toxic work environment. And now, scholars don't really have an agreed upon definition of what a toxic work environment is, but you know it when you're in it. I will say that when you're in a toxic work environment, when you're being belittled, when your mental health is being eroded, when your physical health is starting to be damaged by your work, when you have a lot of emotions about your work that you're not processing. Maybe they're coming out in your relationships with your family and friends. They're noticing behavior and attitudinal changes in you. When you are in these types of environments, your resilience can come at a tremendous cost, right? Because
Yes.
you may sense that you need to stay. There's a great framework, and I'm gonna not remember the name of the scholar who did this, but it is cited in the
That's
book.
okay.
It's the exit voice loyalty framework, and it's this idea of when you're in this toxic environment, you have some choices. If you can get out, like, and you feel like that's your move, look for an exit either to another organization or another department. But some people don't have the ability to do that, right? They don't have the financial resources to make a move. And so that resilience and staying there is probably going to be costly for them in that moment. So they need a lot of compassion and care. The people that are going to stay and use their voice and be like prophetic in the organization to try to advocate for changes to systems and structures and personnel, again, that could come at a cost, right? I remember one of my professors in seminary told me one time when I was trying to be prophetic in a situation and speak truth to power, he said, you know what happens to prophets? They get stoned, right? So I was like, okay, that doesn't sound fun, but it's true, right? There's risk associated with using your voice to
Yeah.
advocate for change. And then loyalty, just putting your head down and staying there. The burnout's not going to get any better. The toxic behaviors are not going to get any better, right? So there are risks, and that's when you're in these moments when your resilience can start to be harmful. That's when you get your friends and family together and you start having them be your community, getting an outside opinion like, am I making this up, or is this really bad? You get their feedback, you get their sense of what is this really doing to me, and then you maybe need to work your networks and really seek the Lord and pray for rescue.
Man, that's really, really good. I hope that people are listening and paying attention, because as you're like speaking, I'm thinking about like several people I know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is what they're going through right now, you know? And it's just a fascinating idea that we can stay in something too long because we feel this sense of loyalty. We feel like we don't want to give up, or somehow we owe something to the company or owe something to the organization. And of course, that's very context specific, no doubt about it. But like just knowing, like, hey, is my mental health deteriorating? Is my physical health deteriorating? Can I even be a healthy person and continue to work here? That throwing up a red flag, I think that's so good for people to look at that and think about it and think about the kind of adjustments that they might need to make. And it kind of moves into this next question I'm thinking about, because you talk about the great resignation and this increasing dissatisfaction with work. From your research, what are the biggest areas and reasons really why people feel so disillusioned with their jobs today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's definitely been some generational shifts, and I was looking at some of the data again recently on work engagement, right? Gallup has done some really good work over the past few years about what helps people to stay engaged and feel satisfied in their work. And there's this expectation that work is going to deliver more than a paycheck, that it's going to be, you might use the psychological term, there's going to be an opportunity for self-actualization, coming to realize one's gifts and potentials. But people are not looking to be able to do that on their own. They're looking for a boss or an organization to be able to support that growth. They are looking for their managers to give them really good feedback in the workplace. They're also looking for good pay, right? Yeah, a paycheck is important, but they want good pay. Now that we have more access to job listings on the internet and we can see different people's salary expectations, we know what people with our comparable skill sets and what we bring to the organization are making in other types of positions. So, like, I have a friend who is a graphic designer, and she took a job that was lower than what she thought she was worth, but it had some great benefits to it. But then she started looking around and realizing that other jobs doing the same exact thing were making $25,000 more. And
Whoa.
so then that becomes really alluring for her to leave. People are also wanting opportunities for advancement. Like, if you are looking and you're like, oh, there's actually nowhere for me to go up in this organization, all I can do is just max out at my current position. I'm not going to get a promotion any higher. I might have to do a lateral move. People do want to advance in their careers, and so they're going to opt out because of that as well. And then, I think burnout continues to be a really, really big issue for people in the workplace. And, burnout's something I've been tracking for quite a long time, even before I started working on this book. Even before that, I was working on like pastoral burnout and clergy burnout for a while. And so I've been in that field of study, looking at the trends, looking how we've looked at burnout. And I'm really even interested in, it is Cal Newport's latest book, Slow Productivity. And he's making an argument in that
Yes.
book that especially those of us that are like knowledge workers, that we do not have a great sense of the amount of work that an individual can take on without becoming overloaded, because we don't really have great definitions for what productivity looks like. And so I see that in a lot of spaces, that people just keep getting more and more work. They're asked to produce more and more, sometimes with fewer and fewer resources, and we just can't do it. Like, we're just human beings. We're not human doings, and we can't be expected to continue to give without some input and some rest.
Yeah, I would love to dig into this a little bit more because I think it's so important. How do you know when you're burning out? I think we've kind of alluded to some of the things, mental health, but I'd love for you to go in even deeper, because burnout is such an I think it's a buzzword in some ways, but I also think obviously it's a very real thing, and it has real medical and psychological, right, and relational consequences. And what is burnout, and how can people know when they're like they are burning out versus they're burnt out,
Yeah.
if that makes sense?
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to know it until you're in it. But yeah, there has been a classical definition of burnout for several years. And more recently, the World Health Organization has classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon. So it's not so much a health
Hmm.
issue. Like, you're not going to go to your doctor and ask for the diagnosis of burnout. So it's an occupational phenomenon, but it's tends to be classified by a few things. One is like depersonalization in your work anymore. There's kind of this
Hmm.
like distancing from your work. I'm even going to flip back to my book because I want to make sure that I get this right. I should know it off of the top of my head
It's
because
all good.
I talk about it quite enough. Okay. So this is the World Health Organization definition. Burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress. So the chronic
Hmm.
workplace stress is a really important thing. It's not the one-time event, like your boss said something really bad, or you had the project that was a total train wreck, and now you're like just totally depleted from that. That's not burnout. Burnout is from chronic, so it's like been going on for a long time. Workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. I think one of the tendencies when talking about burnout, and this has been a shift in the research over time, is that a lot of people thought originally burnout was the individual's problem. Like, we're not exercising good boundaries. We are not doing what we need to do. But the actual issue that we're thinking now is actually, it's because it's an organizational phenomenon. It's things that the organizations are doing wrong, the managers are doing incorrectly or poorly. And so that's where it comes up. So then here are the three dimensions of burnout. And again, these go back to some of the historical research on burnout. Feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. This is not just
Hmm.
you're tired at the end of the day because you've been working. This is you are your emotional energy, your relational energy, your creative energy. It is bankrupt. The well is dry. Right. So
Hmm.
that is where you are. That is that component of burnout. The depersonalization I was talking about earlier, increased mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job. So you're not showing up to work you're not excited about your work. You're not motivated to do your work. You are quite the opposite. You are like, I am only doing this to get a paycheck. I have no feelings for what I'm doing right now. I don't really care. And if you do need to care to try to get it done, you're having to dig super deep to get there. And then the last piece is reduced personal efficiency. You're not as productive as you once were, right? You're slower because you're exhausted, because you don't have that motivation piece there. So when you are in it, it can be really hard to see. I think when you start to notice it actually is when you stop doing it and you stop and take a vacation, like a true vacation from your work. So you're not looking at your email, checking your Asana or your Slack. You are like just mentally shut off from that. What
Yes.
happens in your body? What happens in your creativity, in your relationships? But more importantly, what are you feeling when it's time to go back to work? If you are feeling existential dread, if you are not feeling refreshed and you come back and you are just still hitting a wall, you may be burnt out. And so you may need to figure out what is going on with you. But like I said, sometimes you don't know until it's too late because you've in it and we don't have a great job of really stopping to pay attention to what we're feeling, right? We're just muscling through sometimes. We think like, oh,
Yeah.
it's not that bad, or like, oh, I just really got to do this because I need the paycheck, or this is, if I can just tough this out for a little bit longer. But we don't actually stop and say, what's going on in my heart and my mind and my body right now? And how is it affecting my work? We don't get somebody else's opinion, right? To say, hey, are you noticing anything different in my work? And when we don't check in with ourselves, I think we're going to miss the signs.
So, what are the consequences of ignoring burnout? Like, why is this such a big deal? Like, again, I mean, I understand you're uncomfortable. I understand you want to be in a place where you're excited about going to work. And all of that is really important for productivity and all of that. People don't want burnout employees. They're not productive. They're not, so I guess, and that all is very clear to me. And that makes a lot of sense. But then it feels like there's also these consequences that can come in, and I'm just wondering what are those consequences? And yeah, like what happens if someone just ignores the burnout feeling and then like you said, it's too late. What does too late look like?
Too late, unfortunately, for a lot of people, ends up with being like major health issues related to the burnout. And so that could be anything from stress-related illnesses like cardiovascular issues, or people being just chronically ill, right? You get ill too often or frequently and you can't get over things. So that amount of stress, there's so much research on the effects of stress on our body, and that burnout and being there and staying in that and not getting relief, it does do harm to our bodies. I think it also does harm to our spirits, right? Because when you're so depleted and you're so exhausted, you need so much to fill back into you so that you are a source of life still for other people. And it's really hard when you don't have the energy or the motivation to do that. You talked about the organizational consequences for burnout. I mean, those are huge. Nobody wants burnt out employees, right? They're not going to be singing the songs of your organization because they're not excited to be there. They're not going to be doing their best quality work because they're exhausted and they're mentally and emotionally checked out. So nobody wants burnt out employees. But then for Christians, I think when we are in a state of burnout, right? I don't want to put it on us like it's our fault that we got to burnout. It's probably not our fault.
Right.
We may have some boundary issues that we've got to work through, some communication issues about communicating overload in the workplace. But when we're in an organization and in a system that is getting us to a place where we are completely burnt out, then we have to think about what that is doing to our light and to the ways that God wants to use us in the world. Your light goes dim when you are burnt out, right? Jesus calls us to be a light on the light of the world. Like when we are burnt out, we're not doing a great job of that. Right. If I'm in burnout, I'm probably not reflecting the glory of Christ in ways that I could if I'm in a season of thriving and flourishing, or even just moving toward health, right? And experiencing Christ's healing and redemptive work in my heart and life. But when I am burnt out, like it's not doing anybody any good.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I have felt burnout before. And that typically, I mean, I've even probably felt it. I know I felt it in the last few years. I mean, my wife and I planted a church in 2020, and, I still feel very called to go back to that calling thing. And I still feel like, hey, I want this to be successful. And I still feel motivation around it. But I also feel and have felt a lot of like, man, I'm tired, right? I don't know. Can I do questioning, doubting? Can I do what's required? Really, that's what it comes out. Can I do what's required? And continuing to dig, continuing to ask the questions. And God's brought around us some great people that are really helping us and that are really supporting us, even within the church. And so it's feeling like it's really moving in the right direction. But that sense of like uncertainty, it just kind of hangs there. And I think part of that is also because, it started it. It's like, if I don't continue it, it won't continue, at this point, you know what I mean? And like a lot of it just falls on me, this overall sense of vision. Of course, God, right? You say God is the one that's going to do it. And yet it feels like many times, yes, God is going to do it. And yet I have to do it too, because it's like I'm the one who's going to express that to people, what I see God wanting. No one else is going to come in and make the decisions. They just can't. That's not their responsibility. That's not what they're supposed to do. They come in as supportive roles. And part of this thing I've realized, and I've realized it for a long time, but getting myself separated, my sense of worth and value and identity separated from this has been a beast of a process. A beast of a process. I had no idea how much success at work was tied to my sense of identity until I came and started this church. And I think that I'm not alone in that. I think there's a lot of people that feel that identity is tied to their work. And how do you see that faith should shape how we see our work, how we see our worth, our value, and how do we, it feels like we're walking on a tightrope with that, because it's just very hard to distinguish. And I guess what I mean is like, and I want to hear your thoughts for sure, but I just want to get this out. I guess what I mean by that is that we get to this place where like we want to do something of value and we want to do something that's adding value into the world. And it's so tied to what we do and how we work and then the money that we make and our ability to even not have to worry about all these other things that can distract us from adding value into the world. And it just gets very much tied, and it's been this enormous process of untangling myself, and I'm not there at all, by the way. I mean, I think I'm maybe, I don't know, a quarter of the way there. Who knows? But it's like it's untangling this sense of identity to my work. What are your thoughts on that, and how should faith be shaping us in this way?
It's such a good question and it's so real. Thanks for sharing your own journey with that.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there too, right? That my identity and worth is what my LinkedIn profile says, right? Or my identity and worth. I
Basically.
remember, when I had first started this consulting business very early on, I wasn't even like really treating it like a business. I was just happy if I got a project and got a little bit more income, doing it very part-time, mainly during nap times when my kids were little. And, I remember there was one year that I didn't make any money. Like I didn't have any income in my business that year. And I wasn't really sad about that until my college alumni office called me asking, the annual, hey, would you like to give to the college? And I just in that moment felt so ashamed that I was like, I am a
Wow.
graduate of this university and I did not make any money last year. Like, what?
Mm.
There was so much messed up in my identity at that point that my worth was tied to my resume, to my earning potential, to my ability to give back to my alma mater. Like all of those things were so intertwined. But I think the Bible reminds us over and over again that we are first and foremost God's image bearer.
Mm.
Right, before anything else, we are God's image bearers. Now, God is a worker, and one of our very first mandates in Scripture is to partner with God in the care for and cultivation of the earth. And
Yes.
we see God giving Adam and Eve work to do very early on in the chapters of Genesis. And so when we stop, we realize that we are a worker, but first and foremost, we are people, we are beings that are created to image God. Now, we image God through our work, but that doesn't mean that if our work goes away, that we cease to image God, right? So if I
Mm.
lose my job, I don't cease to image God. If I'm a mom whose primary work has been caring for my children and now they've gone off to college and I'm an empty nester, that work that has defined my life for maybe, 20 plus years has shifted dramatically, is, gone, is different, but I'm no less made in the image of God. And our work is bigger than a single occupation, right? Like occupations, the ways that we do various jobs and various tasks, they come and go throughout our lives, right? But our call to be image bearers, our call to follow Christ and to live out the values of the kingdom, those are the through threads, no matter what our job is. And so I think when we're in these moments where we're tempted to conflate our identity with a particular job or our status or our resume or our success, earning potential, fill in the blank, I think we have to pull back and remember that like if the job were to go away, right? If LinkedIn crashed tomorrow and I didn't have like all the accolades or, career resume stuff on LinkedIn, who am I? I am a child of God. Now, I'm
Mm.
a child of God who has been given good gifts by the Spirit that are unique that I'm supposed to steward in this world, but I can do that in a variety of ways. And there won't always be opportunities for me to use my gifts. There may be certain restrictions based on where I live or my culture that may inhibit me from expressing my gifts in a job, but I'm still a child of God. I'm,
Man. I mean, if we would internalize that message. And then, of course, it leads me to the question, well, how do you internalize that message? Like, even thinking about something like identity, it's like, it's so, sometimes it can be very abstract, right? Where we're like, what do you even mean, my identity? Sometimes it feels like I got 5, 6, 7, 8 identities. I feel like I have like, some kind of disorder where it's like, where is my actual identity? Where who am I? And it seems to me like a sign of this, that our identity is put so much in something, is when it, like you said, it is taken away, and then we feel empty and purposeless.
Mm.
And we feel like we don't have any value. That means our value was very much tied to our function and whatever that was. And it gets to this like idea of contentment. And like that is like a curse word in my vocabulary, contentment. And the reason I say that is because I don't feel like I ever have it. And I feel like I'm a Christian. I feel like people will throw, I'm a pastor. People can throw, well, Paul learned the secret of being content in every situation. He had, Christ gave him strength and all these things, Christ gave him strength. And you're like, yeah, that's great. So I don't know what that says about me being not content. And it's like this weird sense between the ambition that you have, right? Because ambition, it would seem to me, requires a level of discontentment,
Hmm.
your more dissatisfaction, right? You don't like what you see. You don't like the status quo. You want to make more. You want to do more. You want to have more impact in the world around you. And so there's this ambition where there's this dissatisfaction with the way that things are. And it would seem like if I was completely satisfied, for instance, with how the church is right now, I don't know what motivation I would have to change, what motivation I would have to grow, what motivation I would have to do the things that may be required to have the most impact. And it would seem like having the most impact we can is a worthy goal. That's a good thing. I know that can go off the rails. And this, like, I think that kind of illustrates the tension between having this ambition where we all want to, you wrote a book. I'm assuming you wrote a book out of an ambition that you said, it's like, hey, I want to get this out into the world because I think it's going to make an impact. And I want a book like this, something where I can express myself, express something I'm learning and my skills so that I can help people. There's an ambition with that. There's a dissatisfaction with the fact that you didn't write a book that's driving you to write a book. Now, I could be wrong. Please correct me on any of that. But then the contentment, the call to be content, the call to have this inner peace, this shalom that it seems like we're longing for. How do we, and I know I'm not looking for the golden answer here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking, or the silver bullet. I'm looking for your reflections, right?
Mm-hmm.
In your research in your own life, how have you balanced and how have you seen, and how would you advise Christians to balance career aspirations and ambitions with contentment?
I'm just jotting some notes down because I want to make sure to.
Absolutely. Take all the time you need.
Yeah. So when you first started talking about contentment, my mind immediately went to a book that I've read multiple times that actually has taught me a lot about contentment. And it's a book by Wendell Berry called Hannah Coulter. That's one of his novels. And it's a really short novel. It's about one of the women from Port William, which is the fictitious town that Barry writes about in his novels. But I'd maybe encourage your listeners to pick it up and read it and see if they see Hannah's struggle with finding contentment when life didn't go the way that she had thought it would. I've read it multiple times. Actually, for a while, I was reading it every Christmas break going into the new year and learning something different from it each time. So that's one thing that I would offer. Another thing that I would offer, the career ambition piece is really interesting. I think when I was really young, like right in college, I had a lot of ambitions for my career. I started college and I was like, I'm going to graduate with a degree in economics and go into international relations and make 6 figures a year as a, college graduate. what on earth? Whatever, right? What was I thinking? I did none of that. I majored in math and Spanish and went to seminary and, did not make six figures after any of that. So, right. So I picked the career path where six figures is like a pipe dream forever, right? So, yeah. So the career ambition thing is really interesting. I did some research several years ago with Christian college students, and I ask them, what kind of things are factoring in for you making a career decision. And one of the things that was part of the equation was wanting to make an impact. And I think that is true for most people, right? We want to do something that's meaningful. We want to do something of significance that feels like it's of purpose. We want to be anchored to something in our work that's bigger than ourselves. But what's interesting, and I would probably need to go back and really reflect on this. And even now I'm like, oh, I think I want to go back to the scriptures and reflect on this even more. But I'm wondering if there's a place in scripture where we're called to have a big impact or strive to have a big impact, right? We're called to follow Jesus. We're called to steward our gifts in meaningful ways. But I think about the people that God called to certain things. Like, yes, ultimately, God wanted Jesus to have a big impact, and he's had the biggest impact of any person ever to walk the face of the earth. Right? We're not going to argue about that. But Jesus did that through intentional discipleship of 12 people and then the crowds that followed and that he preached to. And in fact, Jesus often withdrew from public places, right? Like, I don't know. Like, it'd be really interesting if Jesus were around today, would he be trying to build the biggest platform on TikTok or LinkedIn? That's a really interesting thing. Or would he be
that's a good question.
Going about different things?
I don't like that question, Meryl.
Well, I mean, that's probably a question for another day, but even as an author, I have never liked how we as like a Christian writing, community have talked about platform. It's always bothered me a little bit theologically. And, because I'm wondering, I'm like, is that what Jesus would have us do? I think what Jesus would have us do is be faithful right where he has us. And that's if that is changing a diaper, it's changing a diaper. If it's taking the dog for a walk, it's taking the dog for a walk. If it is filling out a spreadsheet, it's that. Be faithful, do your work well. And that is a way that we partner with God in advancing the kingdom by doing things that are good, true, beautiful, and just. I think there will be some people that will be called to these really big world-changing things. Like, we just rewatched Amazing Grace about William Wilberforce. Right? Like, he was called, but he wasn't alone in that. There were several other people that partnered with him in that work. He was the public face of it, and goes down with the credits for the one who really led that charge, which is right and good. But like, not all of us will be invited to like take up these big, gigantic causes, but that doesn't mean that they're any less significant, because God advances his kingdom through our everyday faithfulness, right? To showing up to what is right before us. And so I think our ambition should be to serve God and to make God's name great, no matter where we are. I think that
really
is
like
our
that.
ambition. I get really nervous when we start talking about the size of our platforms. I think there is something good about wanting to reach people with our message. But when we take the numbers and the size of the platform and that becomes what we're aiming for, as opposed to serving people in order to help them follow Jesus better, I think that's where we get just like a little bit off. And it's so easy, right? Like, I have been, in my job I just left, I oversaw our marketing strategy, and there is an allure of trying to get those newsletter subscribers, a couple thousand more, right? Or the hits on the website, a little bit more. And there are really good things about doing all that work well to extend your reach of your message. But at the end of the day, if we are not sticking to our message about we are here to try to help you follow Jesus more closely, then we haven't done our job. And one thing that a practice that I have set for myself when I'm doing things that are public, when I start to feel like either some imposter syndrome or some self-doubt or an overinflation, like, oh, I'm going to hear and like swing for the fence and I'm going to make such a huge impact. I try to right size it and say, today I'd like to show up and in my faithfulness, serve one person. And if I can serve one person through this, like if my book really helps one person, then I will feel really good about that. Like if somebody listening to this podcast, if one person, obviously it'd be great if more, but like if one person like gets an impact and takes something away from this and it changes the way that they think about their work, or it gives them hope in the midst of burnout, like praise God that he's using my story to help somebody. So that's kind of how you just my like very off the cuff thoughts about contentment. I'm going to add one more thing about contentment just to like continue
Please.
to stir the waters. One of my last projects at the DePree Center was a research study on joy. So we talked to Christian executives about how they experience joy in the context of their work. And before I got into all of those interviews, I read a lot about how different people, psychologists, philosophers, theologians, have talked about joy. And one of the authors, Marian Thompson, she is a New Testament scholar. I believe she's still teaching at Fuller Seminary. She did a biblical exposition on joy in the New Testament. And she talks about this category of joy notwithstanding. There's joy because, and that's when we've experienced joy as the result of something that's good that we've experienced, when there's joy notwithstanding. And when she describes that, she's talking about the contentment and satisfaction we have, our ability to experience this deep trust. It's joy that's like rooted in this deep trust of who God is and that God is going to bring about his final shalom. And it was interesting because when we asked people in our study, we interviewed Christian executives. One of the things that we noticed was when they described joy in two different ways. One was what you might expect, like happiness, delight, elation, but the other way was contentment and satisfaction. And that's actually got me really rethinking contentment, because contentment maybe not so much being just at peace and okay and free from dissatisfaction, but contentment and joy as like deep abiding trust that God's got this. God's in control. God's working out his story. God's working out his redemptive mission. Thankfully, like I'm excited to be a part of it, and I'm like gonna let him use me but yeah, I don't know, that's just kind of reshaping how I'm thinking about
I
contentment these days.
really like that. I really, really like that. It is so profound, and it's speaking to me. I mean, right now in the midst of it, contentment feels like this. I don't know, this phantom that I'm chasing, and I see it, and I run after it, and when I get there, it's not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, okay, what's going on? I must be, what I'm seeing must not be contentment. It must be what I think contentment is, and that's not really it. So maybe because it feels like the biblical promise is that contentment isn't something that we have to chase after, but it's actually a gift. And man, that's really profound. Your thoughts thinking about that. This is my last question. If listeners were to take one key insight from this conversation, and even from your book, which comes out March 11th, correct? And so we want people to get the book, and we'll put all sorts of links and all that in the show notes. But if listeners could take one key insight, what do you hope that would be?
I'm going to give two, if that's okay. I'm going to break the rules. One is
Break
you're not
'em.
alone. You're not alone. If you have experienced work hurt, you are not alone. Other people have experienced it too. And I want this book to help you feel seen. Yeah, you are seen. But more than being seen by me, I want you to know that you are seen by God. God sees you in your work hurt. God was with you when it was happening. God did not abandon you. God will not abandon you now. In fact, God is with you and for you and wants to bring you healing and bring redemption in those hard places. And so you are seen and you are deeply loved and cared for by our good, good God.
That's so good. I really like that. So how can people get the book? Obviously it comes out March 11th. There's a couple practical things. How can they get more connected to your organization, follow you and what you're doing? And what are you working on next?
Oh, that's a great question. So, how to get the book? Anywhere books are sold. So, if we're
It's
in
such a
pre-order
weird
stage, if
question.
you're in
Everyone kind
pre-order
of says the
stage,
same thing.
yeah, if we're in pre-order stage, the publisher is asking for you to buy it at Amazon for pre-orders. After that, anywhere books are sold is at Barnes & Noble, Target, Amazon. InterVarsity Press, my publisher, has a free excerpt you can download so you can try it
Nice.
before you buy it. See if you like the writing style, if what I'm talking about resonates with you. And it's also set to come out on audiobook. So if it's going to be paperback, ebook, and audiobooks. Whatever your choice is there, we've got you covered. How you can stay connected with me, you can come over to my website. That's merylherr.com, MERYLHERR. Let me spell my name correctly. MERYLHERR.com. Come on over to my website. You can sign up to join my Substack newsletter there, read a little bit more about me and some of my other writing. I also have a place there on the website, a way that you can share a work hurt story. So, Josh, if any of your audience members that are listening to us today, if they're like, man, I have been through some really tough stuff at work, and I wonder if my story could help somebody else feel seen, or maybe I just want to tell my story to somebody because I haven't told it before. There's a way that they can do that on my website through an email address called whenworkhurts@gmail.com. And I would love to receive those stories. I may use them in an interview podcast or speaking or in some other writing. But don't worry, I take all the names, change everything, all the details so that nothing gets traced back to you or any employers that you want to talk about in your story. But if you'd like to share a story, that is there. Social media, I'm most active on Instagram and LinkedIn. So those are the two places to find me. And what I'm working on next, I have some book ideas for a next book swirling around in my head, but nothing really crystallizing just yet. But my big what's next for me is I have just transitioned out of work at the DePree Center for the past 3.5 years, and I'm really resurrecting my consulting business that has just
Nice.
been existing for a few years. I haven't been very active in it. And so I am just back to running a business and putting together a business plan and networking and getting my name out there to primarily nonprofit organizations. Those are my primary clients, but just trying to do that work of getting a business back up and running and putting food on the table.
I hear you. Well, many blessings in that, and I can't wait to see where it goes. Thank you so much, Meryl, for being on the Faith Roundtable today. It has been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Absolutely. And to our viewers, guys, thanks so much for joining us again. Remember, hit like, subscribe. It's just not about my ambition. That's not what it's all about. It's about getting good content out to people. And so if this affects one person, that's good enough. Send it to someone that you feel like needs to hear this conversation. This again has been Dr. Meryl Herr. We're going to put links to her website and to the book where you can get that and pre-order it on the podcast notes. Thanks guys for joining us. And until then, take care and God bless.